Welcome back to another episode of Evoke Greatness. My guest today is Laura Gassner Otting. She is an author of multiple books. Most recent, the book coming out as of April 4th, which we're all like absolutely in anticipation of, is Wonderhell. And then previous book, Limitless. She is a powerful and magnetic speaker, one of the top executive coaches in the world, and an absolute force of nature. Laura, absolutely grateful to have you here.
Oh, it is so great to be here. I'm really excited about this today.
Well, in doing my homework and my research on you, you are just a fascinating individual. And I love the evolution of people's lives, right? Kind of those new versions of ourselves that we become. And so you've had this amazing career from dropping out of law school to join Bill Clinton's presidential campaign when he was really like an unknown governor.
Yes.
To then being a presidential appointee as he took the White House, to then really launching into your career for a national search firm where you were the youngest vice president they'd had, to then getting to a place where you were unwilling to maybe have the definitions of success and standards that they were holding up. And so you decided, to hell with this, I'm going to do this on my own. And you launched your own search firm that grew to become wildly successful. You continue to evolve in your career. What has been one of the biggest lessons that you have garnered out of these evolutions of where you started to where you are today?
Yeah, well, I would say the biggest lesson is that the person who we were when we were 16, 17, 18 years old, when some guidance counselor told us to pick a path, pick a trade, pick a major, pick a college, is not the same person who we are today. And I say who we are today, regardless of what your age is, right? You could be 23, you could be 33, you could be 43, you could be 53, you could be 63. It doesn't matter. The thing is, we all make these decisions about who we want to be for the rest of our lives before we literally have a frontal lobe, like the part of our brain that actually dictates good, sound, logical decision making. And so is it any wonder that we wake up one day and we're like, okay, so I did all the things I was supposed to do. All the boxes are full. Why do I still feel empty? And it's because we make these decisions about who we want to be before we even know who we are. And so I think for me, the biggest lesson is that there were so many points in my career where I woke up one day and I'm like, yeah, what made me happy yesterday isn't going to make me happy anymore. And it's time to do something different. And I allowed myself the grace to make those changes.
Yeah, and that's what I think about. You said grace. I thought when we give ourselves permission that we don't have to live by the last chapter or where we started in that last chapter.
Yes.
That we can give ourselves permission to evolve, to have a new iteration, to dream bigger, to dream differently.
Absolutely. And I think so many people don't give themselves that gift, right? They don't give themselves that gift to say, who I used to be is not who I am. So we have this practice of like, when people ask, what do? You say, I am a nurse. I am an accountant. I am a lawyer. I am a teacher, as if it's this like identity for who we are. And I found this when I sold my last business. I suddenly was like, who am I when I'm no longer LGO, CEO? Here's my business card. And I had this like massive crisis of identity until I realized, oh, what we do should be a verb, not a noun. Why are we making it a noun? Because we make it a noun, it becomes our identity. When we make it a verb, it becomes something that's changeable.
Right. No, I completely agree. You've authored the books that I talked about, but most recently Wonderhell. The release date is, again, April 4th. I know that because my pre-order says it will arrive at my house on April 6th. So I'm like, okay, come on, April 6th. And then your previous book, Limitless, which debuted at #2 on the Washington Post bestseller list, only second to Michelle Obama. I mean, come on. That's just...
Only second, but probably 8.5 million books fewer.
But who's counting that, right? So, but I want to dive into Limitless first. What drove you to write this book for the world?
Oh my gosh. So, okay. The public story is that I spent 20 years in executive search, calling the most successful people in the world, trying to recruit them away on behalf of my clients to come work for them, right? Sounds like kind of a hard job. Call the most successful people in the world about a job they've not heard of and an organization they didn't know existed, definitely from a headhunter they had no idea existed. Except despite all this success, which is why I was calling them, they weren't very happy, which is why they were all calling me back. And I was fascinated by that question of like, why doesn't success equal happiness? It should equal, like, we've all been sold this bill of goods, right? Like, when you're successful, everything will be great. And there I was calling successful people and they weren't very happy. And so I wrote the book based on what I learned from the handful of people who I wasn't able to recruit away, gave them both success and happiness. And it wasn't success as externally defined by a teacher, by a parent, by a boss, by some internet celebrity influencer who we follow. It actually needs to be this intrinsic, this internal definition of success that comes from 4 factors of what's your calling, how much connection your work has every day to that calling, how much that work is contributing to your life and who you are as a human, and how much control do you have over all of it. And so that's the public story of why I wrote that book. The real story of why I wrote that book was because when I did have that crisis of confidence, of identity, like, who am I when I'm no longer LGO CEO? Here's my business card. And I didn't know who I was anymore. I went home one night and I bought LauraGassnerOtting.com because I'm super clever. And I started blogging about stuff that was bothering me in the world. And one of those blog posts got the attention of the woman who runs TEDx Cambridge. And she asked me if I would do a TEDx talk. And I said, no friggin' way. I don't want to speak in public. That's terrifying. No, thank you. Goodbye. My kids heard me take the call and they were like, Mom, don't you always tell us we got to do things that scare us? And don't you always tell us that life starts on the other side of the fear? And don't you always tell us if it doesn't challenge us, it doesn't change us? And I was like, you didn't listen to me tell you to pick up your socks, but that you heard. So 6 weeks later, I'm on the stage, I'm giving this talk, the whole time praying that my lunch doesn't come out of one end or the other, right? And after that talk, which got some attention, I got offers to speak places for money. And I was like, wait a minute, I just spent 20 years in executive search, deliverables, consulting. I got to give you like a 3-ring binder with every, presentation. And I just go somewhere and I talk for 45 minutes and you pay me money and I leave? Like, tell me more about this job. And so as I started speaking in places, I noticed that the people who were making quote unquote real money all had books. So I was like, I better get me one of them. So I was like, what do I know from the last 20 years? And so I wrote Limitless in 6 weeks, but really it took me 25 years and 6 weeks to come up with it. So I could answer the question and say like, oh, well, I wrote it because I was deeply thoughtful and strategic. But no, I like to keep it real because that helps other people know that it's not this like magic that just some people have. Like, anybody can do it.
Well, and that's, I deeply appreciate your authenticity because it doesn't have to create, I think some people create this where it becomes almost like this intangible thing that the rest of the world can't get to.
Right.
I love that was your first time really speaking on stage. Are you kidding me? I mean, and then geez, look back from today just to then.
Well, it's funny. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because that was my very first public speech of my life, right? Terrifying. 2,600 people at the Boston Opera House, gold gilded walls, crystal chandeliers. And it was terrible. It was deeply terrible. That talk has gotten like 14,000 views, I think. And only the last couple thousand of them were because people are like, who is this person? And they looked me up because the TEDx that I did a year ago has gotten over 1 million views. So the difference between me doing that talk in 2016 where I was like, I am a TED talker. This is how TED talkers talk, to me going on stage a year ago, having had, 5 years of experience on stage and really knowing my own voice and knowing who I am and being able to stand not in the center of somebody else's excellence, imitating them on stage, but standing in the center of my own excellence makes all the difference in the world. And if you watch those 2 talks, you can see like, it's not just this magical thing. Like, we all start at the bottom and we have to grow and evolve and learn and do terrible talks before we can do great talks.
Right. I had a conversation with someone about that yesterday. I was doing a virtual presentation and one of the parts of it was being willing to not be great at something. And for people, especially A-type, strong driven women, that's really hard. And that was actually how I started the podcast. This podcast was, I really wanted to do it. And I thought, this is the most ridiculous thing. Who's going to listen? I don't even know what to do. So of course I Google my way through life and, Google, how do you start a podcast? The point of that is that I hit record. I almost threw up. But I hit record. It was And I thought, I'm going to hit publish before I can talk myself out of this. And I know that episode 10 will be way better than episode 1. Episode 20 will be better than 10. And eventually I will start to get the hang of this. And I think that's the thing is we want to go from 0 to 100 and be great, or compare our chapter with somebody 25 years ahead of us. And that's just not how life works.
So when I was writing Wonderhell, I interviewed 100 different glass ceiling shatterers, Olympic medalists, startup unicorns, and everyday people like you and me. Because I was like, how do people deal with all of the tsunami of emotions that come at them when they're like, I know that I'm meant for more. I know there's something bigger inside me. How do I access it? This same question of like, I know I could do this. I just don't know how to do it. And one of the interviews I did was with Jonathan Fields, who has the Good Life Project podcast, right? One of the biggest podcasts in the world. And he told me this story about when he was in his teens, his grandfather passed away and he went to his grandfather's old house and he found this set of paints in his basement and an old door. And he basically like stacked up a bunch of old, cement blocks and put the door on there and he started to paint. And he was in his teens and it was the 80s and he was like, I'm going to paint album covers on jean jackets. And in his mind, he saw the most amazing finished product, but he couldn't do it. And he would get so frustrated with himself and so angry with himself and he would destroy them and all this self-punishing behavior. He said, I thought that I could produce something perfect, something beyond anything I had the right to expect, because I hadn't actually put the time in. I hadn't done the work. I hadn't taken the lessons. I didn't know what I was doing. And he said, now, I talked to him right on the heels of him finishing, publishing, I think his 5th book, which debuted as an instant USA Today bestseller. And he said, now my last book just launched and it was a USA Today bestseller, but I'm not proud of that. He goes, what I'm proud of is that there was a paragraph on the 3rd page of the 4th chapter that I could not have written 10 years ago. I probably couldn't have written it 5 years ago. And now when I see things like the album cover, the things that I can't do, he said, now I say to myself, isn't that amazing that I get to spend the next 5 years, the next 10 years getting better at that thing, right? And I thought that was such a great way to look at it that, I don't know about you, Sonny, but like the only things I've ever been interested in doing in my life have been things for which I've absolutely no qualifications. Like, I'm not going to go do the same job that I just did. I've already done that. It's boring. I don't finish a jigsaw puzzle, put it back in the box and start again, right? You finish the jigsaw puzzle and then you do the next one. Or in our case, during the pandemic, when there was a run on jigsaw puzzles, we like took one, finished it, took another, finished it. And then we mixed the boxes together and then did them. And then we were like, okay, next year we'll do it without the covers. And now we did it upside down. But I think we are, as humans, creatures who want to evolve. Right. So we, A, should not expect perfection before we have any right to have it. B, how great that the internet exists. I mean, when I started my last company, I remember being like, okay, somebody wants to hire me. Google how to write a contract for a professional services firm. I don't know how to do it, but somebody already has. And what a joy that we get to keep learning and growing and changing and iterating. I mean, what a gift.
Right. A gift. Exactly. Well, let's talk about Wonderhell. I love the concept that you use of this amusement park with all of these different attractions or rides. Tell us a little bit about what each of those are and what do they mean?
Yeah, so Wonderhell is organized as a theme park because just like theme parks, we think they're going to be fun. Like you go and you think you're going to have a great time. You're going to go on all the rides. And then it's like 3:00 in the afternoon and the corn dog is kind of like threatening in your stomach and you're a little sunburned and dehydrated and you're not so sure you want to go on that roller coaster you're in the line for. You thought it was going to be fun. Why isn't it fun? Everybody told me it'd be fun once I finally got here. I feel like success is kind of the same way, where we think we have been sold by the success industrial complex that if you rise and grind and lean in and crush it and work harder and 10x, once you get there, it's going to be easy money, smooth sailing. But what I've learned is that every time I succeeded at something, large or small, what waited for me on the other side of it was just a bigger hunger, a faster pace, more uncertainty, more doubt, more anxiety, more stress, more exhaustion, more imposter syndrome. It was wonderful, but it was also hell. It was Wonderhell. So Wonderhell's organized as this theme park. And there are 3 towns in Wonderhell: Imposter Town, Doubtsville, and Burnout City. And then each one of those towns has 5 rides, the rides which should evoke the emotions that we have in those moments. So, in Imposter Town, for example, there's the Imaginarium, when you suddenly are able to dream a little bit bigger about who you think you might be. There's the Fortune Teller. How do you make your own luck? There's the Hall of Mirrors, where you figure out who you actually really are. The Tent of Oddities, right? Once you know who you are and your full freak show yourself, how do you live into your truest version of yourself? And then the Haunted House is, how do you let go of those demons that you've been carrying around that are maybe adding to that imposter syndrome? So we can talk about each of the towns, we can go through them, but that's just a little bit about how the rides work in one.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Haunted House. So I
Yes.
love the idea, and it's terrifying and sad that we, for many years, have been having this conversation about imposter syndrome. And I still probably have people comment on it, or, whether it be on podcasts or people that I'm interacting and engaging with, that still battle with this.
Yes.
And so talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I have always struggled from imposter syndrome. And I thought when I was in Wonderhell, if I talked to these 100 incredible superhumans, that I'd figure out a way how to finally quiet those voices. And here's what I learned, much to my chagrin. Nobody's figured it out. Nobody's figured it out. I mean, I talk to people who run $2 billion companies. I talk to people who have won Olympic gold medals, and they still, to this day, have imposter syndrome. But what I learned, well, first of all, let's just talk about the term imposter syndrome, like the gall of the term imposter syndrome. Like, you're an imposter. Maybe you should leave. You've got a syndrome. Are you sick? Perhaps you should lay down, right? The term itself is so offensive because it says imposter syndrome. The problem is with us, the imposters, right? And not the world in which we are trying to operate, the halls of power that were built for, and, people who don't look like us, who were made for people who don't look like us, who are built by people who don't look like us. So of course we feel like imposters, because we're not, 1950s Mad Men, right? Like, of course we feel like imposters. That's by design. What these people did in order to get through it is they did several things. The first was they embraced their ambition. They were like, you know what? I am an imposter and I'm proud of it. I'm going to do everything I can do. That's amazing. Number 2, they congratulated themselves. And they said, the reason I'm an imposter is because I am somewhere I never thought I could or would or should be. How amazing is that? Third, they saw it as an adventure. They didn't say, oh my God, I've never done this before. They said, oh my God, I've never done this before, right? So they didn't expect that they had to be perfect when they walked in. They knew that being there was just uncharted territory, and how amazing that everything they figured out from here on out was just icing on the cake. And I thought that was pretty cool, because they were able to then renegotiate the relationship that they had with this voice in their head yelling, stop, stop, stop. It's a limitation, to hear it as a go, go, go. It's an invitation. This voice, this imposter syndrome is not a warning bell. It's actually a sign that you're on the right track.
And how do we lean in? How do we learn, I guess, to lean in? Because I think so much of imposter syndrome is like fighting it, right? It's like this battle that you have where you're not getting past it. You're battling it, kind of that gnashing of teeth. And so how do we learn to lean into the imperfection? How do we learn to use that to our advantage even better?
Yeah. I mean, there are so many stories that I tell in the book, but one I would love to tell you is Lydia Finette. Lydia Finette runs the nonprofit arm of Christie's Auction House, which means that every big nonprofit auction that happens really in the world, she is the head auctioneer. She has raised over $500 million with a B, $500 million for nonprofits. And when she first went to Christie's, her dream job, she walked in and she started to shadow the auctioneers. And the auctioneers were all old, white, British, suited and staid gentlemen. Now, Lydia, as you might imagine from her name, is not male. She's also not British. She's not old. She's not suited. She's not staid. And so she would go in and she would shadow them. And then she would try to, like I was trying to do my best TED talk, right? She would do the Christie's auction thing. And she was fine. She was good enough. And then one day when she was like 11 months pregnant, she made some like self-effacing joke right before the auction started. And she noticed that everybody in the audience kind of perked up and they laughed and they paid attention. Now, when you're an auctioneer at a big charity gala, the last thing people want to pay attention to is the person who's going to, separate them from their money, right? They want to like get back to the drinking and the schmoozing. So she has to come in and be pretty powerful. And she noticed that everybody stood up and like paid attention. So then she made another joke and another joke. And now she goes in fully as herself. And she has been one of the most successful auctioneers in Christie's history. Not because she felt like an imposter to try to be like somebody else so that she could fade into the background and nobody would see her, but because, in fact, she embraced what made her different. She embraced what made her interesting. She embraced what made her unique. She embraced what made her special. Like, so many of us want to be special, but we're afraid to be different. And the truth is that our specialness lies in our difference. And so how do we get through it? We just start. My favorite Eleanor Roosevelt quote is, "No, we would worry much less about what other people thought about us if we realized how seldomly they did."
Yes.
You can start. You can be yourself. You can totally fail. Probably nobody's going to notice. So you have so much time to fail and flail as you're figuring it out before you're big time that it's going to be okay. So the best way to get through it, I mean, what is Winston Churchill's quote? Way to get through hell? Like, if you're in hell, keep going.
Right. Oh, I love that. I love that. Societally, or from a career perspective, we've been experiencing something really interesting over the last couple of years, and it's been something coined as the Great Breakup, which I don't really care for the term, but the idea is that you have these senior and executive level women who are leaving their roles where they may have been for a significant period of time, and they are choosing to leave. They're unwilling to accept what they're experiencing there. And so I'm curious, when they're at their breaking point, and you talk about some of these ideas. And so, why do you think that we've come to this, really, and I think it is at least from the US, the societal shift.
Yeah, I mean, so I talk about this a little bit in Wonderhell, but I actually did a 3-year research project during the pandemic, starting in January of 2019, right before Limitless came out, all the way through. It's still going today. It's at limitlessassessment.com, and it's like 67 questions, and I have 6,000 responses from 74 different countries across every single demographic. So I have a pretty good idea, actually, about what's driving all of this. And especially at the senior levels, what we found is that as women grow into the senior ranks, they feel like they need more control, right? Most of these women growing to the senior ranks are Gen Xers or elder millennials. They are the ones who were caught between young children and older parents, right? So they're sort of in the sandwich generation. And they are needing, and they're the ones who, for the most part, are doing most of the housework and most of the housework, right? They're the ones who are sort of picking up all the extra slack. Some men do it, but more women than men do it. And what we're seeing is that as women are growing into these senior ranks, they want more control, just as much as the men want more control. Men are getting as much control as they need, but women actually are feeling they're getting less and less, because the more that they're getting control at work, the less they have it at home. The more they have it at home, the less they have it at work. And while men define their identity primarily as work and then family, women often define their identity either as family and then work, or on equal footing, family and work together. And so because women are feeling stretched and they have less control in both places, right at the very time when they need to be, having more control of everything, it just becomes untenable and something has to give. And so, one of the things that people were saying during the Great Resignation was, you just got to pay people more money. People just want more money. Now, I know from my years in recruiting that there are about 8 motivating factors that get people interested in a job at any given time. And there are things like the mission of the organization. Am I inspired by the leader? What will I learn in the job? How big will my impact be? How prestigious will it look on my resume? What are the benefits? Where is it located? What's, the money, et cetera. Money is one of those things. And that guidance counselor that I mentioned at the very top of the podcast, that guidance counselor gave us that list and said, here's how you decide the value of a job. But they never said, prioritize it in an order that makes sense for you. So you can figure out the value of the job for you. Right. And so a lot of us went into the job thinking, okay, bigger, better, faster, more. I have to keep growing in the corner office and the money and et cetera. And then Sheryl Sandberg told us in Lean In that the only definition of success was the fastest and most expedient path to the corner office. Now, I don't blame Sheryl Sandberg for getting there using all the privilege in the world that she did. We'd all be crazy not to use whatever privilege we had. I've used it. You've used it. She's used it. We all use what the privilege we have. My issue wasn't how she got success. It was how she defined it, that it's just this one thing. And so many of the women who are in those, the upper management ranks or the C-suite are part of that generation that followed that and then looked around one day and said, this isn't meaningful enough for me to be sacrificing everything I'm sacrificing to do it.
Yeah, that's the word meaningful stands out to me. I left. I've been in the corporate world as a chief operating officer for a national healthcare company. It's great. You're making incredible money. It's exciting, and then you get to this place where you have this reckoning with meaning and the meaningful impact that you want to have. And so last year, I made a really hard decision. Now that I look back, it probably wasn't as hard as I made it on myself, but it was that I wanted to have more meaningful impact than just one organization. I wanted to impact organizations and leaders all over the world, not just in one organization. And so stepping into that, it was absolutely in the chase of having something or doing something really meaningful. So I completely resonate with that. Absolutely.
And you went off on your own. So now you have more control over how you spend your time, how much hustle brings in how much money, who you work with, who your clients are, who you put on your team, right? You have more control over, you don't have somebody saying, oh, sorry, I saw that you have your kids, award ceremony for the entire year, but we just needed to put a meeting over that, right? Like you can put the meeting anytime during the week, but I know so many senior women who are like, I don't understand. The guys have on their calendar all day Tuesday golfing, and everyone's like, oh, sorry, we can't have the meeting on Tuesday. Joe's golfing. You wouldn't mind missing your daughter's music recital on Wednesday, would you? Right? It's like that happens all the time. And because women, we tend to be nice, we say yes, right? We don't want to upset the apple cart. We don't want to bother anybody. Sure, no problem. And God forbid I don't say yes. You're going to be like, oh, she's not really dedicated to work. She'd rather be a mom, right? There's just so much garbage that we have to deal with that men just don't. They just simply don't. And not only that, if a man has, my kid's music recital, people are like, oh, isn't he a great father? Right? So, we have all those things that are going on. And this is why I say to women all the time, I think we should stop being nice. We should start being kind, right? There's a big difference between nice and kind. Like a woman is nice. She bends over backwards. She lets everybody walk all over her. But if a man turns to you and amplifies you in a meeting, oh, isn't he kind? If a man decides to mentor you, isn't he kind, right? Kindness is something you give. And I think we as women have to start embodying that role of kindness, right? I'm sitting in a meeting and I just saw somebody make a great point. I'm going to amplify him. I'm going to amplify her. I'm going to just step into my big size 14 man shoes, right? And just act that part.
Oh, I can totally. I think sadly, at least personally with me, and a lot from what I hear of people is we have that niceness so much as we're kind of growing into ourselves. And I know for myself, it probably hasn't been, but maybe the last 7 years that I will walk into a meeting, I will walk into a boardroom. I'm a very different person today than I was previously, where I was like big eyes and terrified and I don't want to say the wrong thing. And now I'm going to say, I promise you, you're never going to wonder what I'm thinking.
Yes.
But I think it takes a while. It takes some life experience to get there. I envy those who got there early or discovered that, way before. But yes, I completely agree.
Yeah. My mom calls them the FU 40s, right? You sort of get to a certain point and you're like, you know what? This is who I am. Like, why are we wasting time here? I'm probably not going to get much better. I hope I don't get much worse. If you give me feedback, and it's real and it's good, I'll go to school on it and I'll work on that. But pretty much there are a lot of consultants out there. You could hire any of them. There are a lot of speakers out there. You can hire any of them. When I worked in search, we used to say there aren't bad candidates. although between us, there were some terrible candidates, but there aren't bad candidates. There are just wrong candidates for certain organizations at certain times. I might be the wrong speaker for certain organizations, for certain events. My book may be the wrong book for certain people at certain moments, but for the people for whom I am right, I am so right.
Yes.
So I might as well just be fully me, because either I'm right for you or I'm wrong for you. And that's great. That's a great way to figure out, and be much more efficient with your time. Because, I spent years, you mentioned in my introduction that I'm one of the top executive coaches in the world. And I think I got that way because I realized at a certain point, after banging my head against the wall one too many times, that I cannot want for my clients something that I want more than they want, right? Like if I see somebody and I see their possibility and they say they want it, but they don't really want to do the work for it, and I really want it for them, I can't get it for them just by wanting it more than them. And so I just became much better at screening for clients who actually wanted the things they said they wanted.
I love that. And that is incredible advice. Just as people lean into coaching and really, truly making it again, meaningful, but this experience where it really does transform people, because you can't will somebody else's life to be way better than it is when they step into seeking you out for coaching. But
Exactly.
Those who are really invested and bought in and willing to do the breakneck work to get there and unlearn and shed the crap. Those are
the crap. That is like, that should be like session 1 in coaching. We're going to shed the crap.
Yes. But so I think, let's talk about when people get to these new levels in their career. So I think that can kind of be a confusing time too. As you evolve, the idea is that we continue growing, that you want to continue growing in your career and life, and the discernment that comes with understanding who we have in our life, or who we should have in our life, and who we shouldn't.
Yes. Yes. So there is a chapter, again, I talked about how the book is organized around rides, and there's a chapter in Doubtsville called the Ferris wheel. And, like a Ferris wheel is that big giant wheel that like goes up, 20 stories up above the amusement park. And from the top of the Ferris wheel, you get a pretty good view of the entire park, where the rides are, what the map looks like, where you want to go, who's on your side, what, cotton candy looks best. I think that it's the same way with success. Every time you get to a new level, you get this perspective, both of yourself and your possibility and your potential and your future, but also about everybody around you. There are a lot of people in your life who are going to cheer you on as you're on the climb. But once you're successful, they get a little quiet. There's a little like smiles in the front and knives in the back. And, or worse, people who are your friends in good times, but not so much in bad times, right? That's kind of heartbreaking. I've had a lot of heartbreak in my life about people who I thought were like on the pursuit with me, who then I realized were not so much abundance-minded people, right? A little bit more scarcity. But then there are the other people who are even harder, right? There are people in our lives who love us and they don't want to see us get hurt. And so they like tell us to keep our dreams smaller. They're just worried about us. Like, your parents, for example, the last time you lived in the same house as your parents, you were 18 years old. Again, didn't have a frontal lobe. So when you tell them you're going to like leave, this business, the corporate life, and start your own podcast, they're probably like, what are you, crazy? Right? Like, what are you doing? Like, are you sure you want to do that? It's not because they don't think you can do it. It's because they're worried about you. But still, you hear that voice of doubt and it like sits in your brain. And then there are the people who are jealous of you, right? The ones who like see your rise and all they see through it is their own stagnation. And they're the ones who are like, yeah, great. And you hear that and you hear their sort of tepid reaction. You don't hear it as them thinking about themselves. You hear it as they don't know if I can do it, right? Like you get the same seed of doubt. And then they're the ones, and these are usually like your old high school friends that you run into like at Starbucks and you tell them about your big, hairy, scary goal. And they're like, oh, you could never do that. That's too scary. What they really mean is I could never do that. I'm too scared. But again, we take all of these bits of criticism and we plant them in our garden with exactly the same fertilizer and we let them grow just as big. And what happens is the very first time it gets hard, the very first time you do that first podcast and it's not as great as you thought, you're like, oh God, man, Joanne from Starbucks told me that I shouldn't do this. It's too scary. Maybe she was right. Right. And it just starts to like germinate in your brain. And so we have to be very, very careful about who we keep around us. You know, there's studies that say that if your closest friends are obese, you are 57% more likely to be obese. I think that's pretty interesting. But it's not just like physical proximity that the study showed. It showed that if the 5 people who you consume the most on social media are obese, you're 57% more likely to be obese. So if you're following celebrities, if you're following Instafluencers, if you're following people who are putting bad ideas in your brain, that is just as much of an influence on you as the people who are living in your own house. In fact, sometimes more. So I think we have to be super careful about who we put in that, you know, sidecar with us and who we take through the tunnel of love, because it is, what they think becomes what we think. What they normalize becomes what we normalize. And we have to be very careful to make sure that the only people who we have surrounding us are the ones who don't let us settle for mediocrity.
Oh, I love that. I've heard you talk about the best piece of advice you've ever received is you're just not that important. How did that land with you when you first heard it? Was it like that powerful moment when you first heard it? Or was it something that...
No, it was terrible. It was offensive. I was so upset by it. I was like, what are you talking about? Of course I'm that important. So the backstory is that I had a conversation with a woman who she had just sold a business for like $60 million. And this was like in 1996 or something. So, you know, $60 million is a lot of money today, but it was a lot of money in 1996. And I sat her down because I needed to get some mentoring advice from her. And I was telling her about my life, and I was kind of just like whinging about, you know, things weren't perfect. She's like, I don't understand what's wrong, Laura. She's like, you got a happy marriage, you got healthy kids, you have a thriving business. What's the problem? I was like, I don't know. Like, I just yell at my kids too much. Like, I'm stressed all the time. Like, I just like, shouldn't it be easier? And she looked at me and she's like, I don't understand. Like, tell me about your day. So I told her about my day, and I was like, well, like, I get up in the morning and I work out, and then I do my work, and then I pick up my kids from school like 3 days a week if I can, like 4 if I'm lucky, but never 5, because, you know, like, cameo appearance is much better than a starring role when you're the mom, right? But I try to like be there, and then I hold up my phone, which I think was like a Palm Trio at the time, like the BlackBerry ear. And I was like, but then I have my phone. So when I take my kids to the park, I can still be in the office. And she's like, whoa, let me stop you right there. She's like, you're taking your kids to the park, but you're on the phone? She's like, why can't you just put the phone in the trunk for an hour and take your kids to the park? And I was like, oh, but like, what if something goes wrong? And she looked at me, she goes, you're not that important. You're not that important. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, of course I am. I've got young kids. I'm just like growing. My business is only like 5 years old. I'm on all these boards in my community. I'm like, of course I'm that important. And she said, no. She said, Laura, she goes, if you're running a business that you can't disappear from for an hour during the day, at best you're a micromanager. At worst, you're the only one who cares about what's happening in that business. She's like, so that's a problem. Number 2, if you're raising your kids and you're taking them to the park and you can't enjoy that, and they think you're somewhere else all the time, then they know that you're not paying attention to them. She's like, it's really no difference whether you take them there or a babysitter takes them there, because there's no interaction. She's like, you're not that important to all the things you think they're that important. And what she meant by that was, there are places where I am that important. Taking my kids to the park, being there for that really important staff meeting. But I'm not that important for all the little individual notifications and bells and whistles and all the things that people pull me into. What she was saying was, Laura, you are not that important to everything and everyone, but to some things and some people you are. So figure out what those things are, double the hell down there, and delegate all the rest of the crap. She was right. And it fundamentally changed how I showed up in my business, how I showed up in my family, how I showed up in my community.
Yeah, you can't be that important to all the things all the time. Ooh,
Yeah. I mean, literally, like the day after I got that advice from her, I was walking out of my kid's school and the woman who runs the PTA was like, "Oh my God, Laura, I'm so glad I ran into you. The woman who was running our bake sale just had an emergency and she can't do it. Would you do it?" And I was like, no, because it was like 3 days from then. I had 16 client things that were due. But at first, like my first reaction was bake sale, school, quality time with my kids. Awesome. And then I quickly realized no, because I'm going to spend those 3 days yelling at my kids, baking a billion terrible things in my house and like having a horrible time, like stressed out the entire time. And all my kids are going to get are like, Mom had to do this thing for me, for my school, and she hated it and she was stressed. And then they'd feel bad, right? So instead I said, I actually can't do that, but let's just stop for a minute and spend 10 minutes and think about who would be right. And we spent 10 minutes and we brainstormed a list of names. And of that list of names, she got not only somebody to chair the bake sale that month, but for the next 4 months coming up, she had 4 different people volunteer. So a lot of times we get asked to do something, not because we have been researched as the most qualified person. It's usually because we're the most proximate heartbeat when the person has a need. So was I that important there? No, but I was that important in that moment to help her figure out a 4-month solution rather than a 4-day solution.
Right. What is something that others place value in that you just don't subscribe to, you don't buy into it?
Game of Thrones. I think I'm the only human who didn't watch Game of Thrones.
I'm there with
Mostly
you.
I'm just a weenie about like horror. I just like don't like gore and horror. I'm such a weenie. What is something that people place value in that I don't? I think it's such a good question. I don't place a lot of value in celebrity. I'm just not. I am a total nerd for like authors, for policymakers, but like celebrity, I'm like my heart's not going to skip a beat if Johnny Depp walks in the room. I don't know. I guess it's because like my very first like real grown up job was working in the White House. So like I spent a lot of time like in the Oval Office and seeing politicians and presidents and celebrities there. And they're just people. And so many times I do a lot of political fundraising sort of in my avocation. And people will say to me all the time, like, "Oh my God, I can't believe like you talked to whoever, Senator whoever." And I was like, Senator whoever works for me and you. That's their job, right? Like literally, like we fund their elections, we vote for them, we put them in office. Like they serve at the will and the whim of us citizens. Like they're not special. They're our employees. Like, let's like think about it. So and I feel the same way about celebrities. Like celebrities are celebrities because we pay to go to their movies. Like they work for us. I guess that's it. I've never been asked that question. It's a really good question.
And that's a fascinating perspective.
I want to know your answer to that question, actually.
When I think about it, I think about, others don't buy into, it's kind of opposite. Others don't think you can have it all. And I do. And it's in my own way. Like, I think that I have imposed so many limits on my life until, like I said, in my probably mid to late 30s, that I'm like, yeah, no, I'm going to call bullshit on that. I think that I can have what I want, and is it going to require different things through different seasons? Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
I do think that I can have it all.
I agree with you. And I think that is, it's something that took me a long time to figure out. It's not, can you have it all? Can you not have it all? Can you have it all now? Can you have it all later? I think it's really a question of defining all, right? Like for me, the definition of all changes season to season for sure. Like, I'm 6 months away from being an empty nester. So like, what does having it all look like then? Right now, having it all looks like making sure that I only get on the road for like full fee gigs, for big audiences, for really important, because I don't want to miss these last 6 months. But 6 months from now, having it all could mean I fly to Houston or Providence, where both my kids are going to be in college, for free, so I can do a keynote, so that I can just see them, right? Like it's just, I think having it all, it just changes. And I think that goes back to what I said in the beginning, that we have this idea of like who we're supposed to be when we're younger. And then we think that that's a definition that's going to work for us for the next 50, 60 years. When even if we did know who we were at 15, 16, 17 years old, the world around us changes. I did when Limitless first came out, I got asked on podcasts all the time, like, what advice would you give to your 22-year-old self? And I was like, my 22-year-old self who's listening to a podcast that was recorded on the internet and I'm hearing it on my cell phone. None of those things existed when I was 22. So even if I did know who I was, the world changes so much that it doesn't actually matter. My only advice would be like, expect that you're not going to know, like expect the unexpected,
Yeah, there you go. Well, I kick myself. We'll wrap up here. Again, I want to be respectful of your time, but I would kick myself if I didn't bring up two things that stand out in so many of the times that you are just owning the stage. And that is your absolute rock star toned arms. I'm enamored with your arms, I have to tell you. And your ridiculously put together, perfectly color coded outfits. I sit here and it's dreamy, but really what that is you are put together. You take care of yourself. You're diligent. You're thoughtful in what you do and how you present yourself. Right. And so I number one, I just wanted to give you those compliments because that's, it's something that you don't get by mistake or by, happenstance, right? You work really hard for those things.
Well, I appreciate that. I will say I do work hard for the arms. I have a lot of coaches that I work with to help. Like the color coded outfits are just because I don't know how to dress myself. So if I wear one color from head to toe, I always match.
And it's always so good though. I'm always like, dang. But what that leads me to is what are your kind of habits and routines look like on a day-to-day basis? Those non-negotiables that you're not willing to skip on when it comes to your physical and mental health.
Yes. So I think the 4 pillars of good health are hydration, nutrition, movement, and sleep. So I try to drink 100 to 128 ounces of water every day. I try to follow some semblance of a macro plan that's, high protein, medium fat, low carbs. Because I'm a rower and I do lightweight rowing, so I have to make weight at different times. So I sort of play with the macros that are there to what makes me feel good. For some people it's paleo, for some people it's vegan. It doesn't matter, but I just try to stick to what makes my body feel good. Sleep, I try to be in bed pretty early. I mean, I'm up at 4:35 in the morning to go row or run or yoga or whatever it is. So I'm usually in bed by 9 o'clock. Last night, I think I was asleep at 8 because I'm battling this cold that you hear. And then movement, 60 minutes of movement every day, whether it's sprinting, running, HIIT workouts, hardcore rowing, or walking, yoga, stretching, just something, but 60 minutes of just trying to move my body. And I try to do the movement first thing in the morning because then I'm the most creative after that. So I do my movement, I take a shower, I have my green tea, and then I try to be productive for a 3-hour block in the morning. And that usually sets me up for a pretty good day.
Yeah, and that really promotes that clarity and the focus to increase and improve your productivity. Excellent pillars. Well, as we wrap up, I want to have you share for everyone, where can they find out more about you? Where can they order the book? Again, it's coming out next week, which is April 4th for anyone who may be listening in a different time. So make sure to get that. But where can they find you and follow you?
Yeah. So my name is Laura Gassner Otting. All my good friends call me LGO. So I'm at Hey LGO on all the socials, HEYLGO. The book is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere you get your fine books, bookshop.com for independent bookstores. And if you order it before April 4th, Wonderhell.com gives you loads of pre-order goodie bonuses.
Amazing. Well, we will put all of this in the show notes. LGO, thank you so much for your time and for coming on and just sharing a part of your day with us.
Thank you so much. I had a great time today, Sonny.